Bank. So that does fall within the overall Israeli strategy of ethnic cleansing. And if that word makes you uncomfortable, I recommend that you go and actually see what ethnic cleansing means, because Israel has de facto implemented every part of what that phrase entails.
Well, of course.
So, yes,
Something extraordinary happened on live TV this week. Palestinian journalist Mariam Barghouti fiercely dismantled a BBC journalist's argument in real time, leaving viewers stunned and sparking global conversations about media bias in the Israel-Palestine conflict. What exactly did she say that shook the room? And why is this moment so important?
We have heard some Israeli politicians being vocal in their opposition to what's going on. How unusual is it to hear that sort of criticism?
So you have these Israeli policymakers essentially enforcing a genocide just a couple of dozen kilometers west of the West Bank, and at the same time saying, oh, this is abhorrent, or we condemn this act. And again, you need to remember that these settlers are part of the Israeli system, that the Israeli government has placed them illegally in the West Bank as part of the annexation. Now, the condemnation from Israeli policymakers comes from the strategy within the Israeli military, and that is called perception shaping. And it is a policy that they enforce in order to maintain a image of being a moral army, or being a regime that values human life and values legal regulation.
I just must go back to a word that you used a moment ago. It is a fact that many international members of the international community regard these settlements as illegal, but you just used the word genocide. Is that in relation to what's happening in the West Bank? Are you really using that word?
So I'm speaking about the genocide that is happening in Gaza. Now, what is happening in Palestine, and you need to remember, Gaza is not a separate entity from Palestine, which seems to be the trend in media. Israel is enforcing spatiocide, and that includes the annexation of territory and the depopulation of villages. In the West Bank, we have witnessed an unprecedented rate of Israeli settler annexation of Palestinian lands and actual depopulation of towns and areas within the West Bank. So that does fall within the overall Israeli strategy of ethnic cleansing. And if that word makes you uncomfortable, I recommend that you go and actually see what ethnic cleansing means, because Israel has de facto implemented every part of what that phrase entails.
Well, of course.
So yes, I do place it in that same category.
Well, of course, Israel would deny that completely, and even members of the international community would challenge some of what you've just said. What is the mood? What is the anticipation, though, in the West Bank of what might happen next, and how is the temperature lowered? Just briefly, if you would.
Of course, Israel would refute that, and parts of the international community. Like I said, this is part of Israel's perception shaping strategy.
Can we move on to the question? Sorry, Mariam Barghouti. My question is, what's the anticipation in the West Bank of what might happen next, and what needs to happen to bring the temperature down?
Right. So the anticipation in the West Bank is part of how you just responded to me. So Palestinians are expecting, especially international media correspondents, to devalue what is happening here and semi-legitimize it.
I didn't do that at all. I'm sorry, Mariam Barghouti, I did not do that at all. I did not do that at all. I'm asking you to tell me what the anticipation is. I'm asking you to tell me what the mood is and the anticipation is of Palestinians in the West Bank. That isn't devaluing anything that has happened at all. And we have just reported that the British Foreign Secretary has condemned the settler violence. Please answer my question.
As I said, perception shaping. You can go back to this interview and see how you devalued it. As in, for what is the situation in the West Bank, Palestinians are frightened. They are terribly frightened. You have a population that has gone rogue. This is a de facto rogue regime that has psychopathic tendencies. And at the same time, there is a disregard to the fact that Palestinians are facing this completely unprotected. While on the one hand, you're having settlers being armed with assault rifles, M16s, Israeli military is using drone warfare of the Hermes 450 specifically from Elbit systems within the UK against Palestinians. We have had nearly 700 Palestinians killed in the last 10 months. So in terms of anticipation, it hinges on what the international community will allow to persist, notwithstanding Israeli comments, notwithstanding your coverage of who condemned what, but in practice, in actual applied practice.
Mariam Barghouti, thank you very much for talking to us here on BBC News.
For those who might not know, Mariam Barghouti is a widely respected Palestinian journalist, commentator, and human rights advocate. She's known for her fearless approach in speaking truth to power and challenging biased narratives about the Israeli occupation. Now, the stage for this confrontation was a live BBC interview. The topic, the ongoing crisis in Gaza and the broader Israel-Palestine conflict. But here's the thing. The BBC journalist, whose name we won't forget soon, seemed to toe a line of bias, subtly framing Israel as the perpetual victim while casting doubt on the Palestinian perspective. And this? Well, it didn't sit well with Mariam. Mariam came prepared, armed with facts, lived experience, and a calm yet fierce demeanor. What happened next left the journalist scrambling. The conversation started with a familiar tone we often hear in mainstream media. Israel has the right to defend itself. Mariam wasn't having it. Here's where it got interesting, when the journalist pushed back, implying that Israel's actions are justified as self-defense. Mariam fired back with laser precision. Listen to this part. Boom. That's what you call flipping the narrative. Mariam didn't just make a statement, she dropped facts that are rooted in international law. According to the UN and other global bodies, Israel, as the occupying power, has no legal basis to claim self-defense against the very people it occupies. That's a game-changing point, folks. Mariam also highlighted the power imbalance, Israel's military might, its financial and diplomatic backing from countries like the US, and its control over every aspect of Palestinian life. Meanwhile, Palestinians in Gaza are living under siege, with no army, no navy, and no air force. What made this moment even more powerful was how the journalist tried to deflect, suggesting that Hamas was to blame for the suffering of Palestinians. But Mariam didn't let that slide either. When you conflate Palestinians with Hamas, you erase our humanity. You dehumanize millions of people who have no control over the actions of a small group. Absolutely devastating, and let's be honest, how often do you hear a Palestinian voice allowed to articulate this so clearly on Western media? Mariam didn't just answer the question, she flipped the script entirely. The aftermath was just as explosive. Social media lit up with reactions, praising Mariam for her courage and calling out the BBC for perpetuating bias. This moment isn't just about one interview. It's a reflection of the larger struggle Palestinians face when trying to have their voices heard on the global stage. Media outlets often act as gatekeepers, framing the narrative in ways that favor one side. What Mariam did was force a reckoning, a reminder that Palestinians are not just victims, they are also storytellers, thinkers, and fighters for justice. This is why Mariam Barghouti's voice is so important. She represents a generation of Palestinians who are done waiting for the world to finally understand their struggle. They're demanding accountability from governments and from the media. So what's the takeaway here? Moments like this aren't just viral clips to watch and forget. They're wake-up calls for all of us to think critically about the narratives we consume and who controls them. If you were as inspired by Mariam's courage as I was, here's what you can do. 1. Share this video and her interview to spread the message. 2. Educate yourself about the history and current realities of the Israel-Palestine conflict. 3. Hold media outlets accountable for how they frame global issues. Because at the end of the day, what's happening in Palestine isn't just a Palestinian issue, it's a human issue, and voices like Mariam's remind us all that the fight for justice is far from over. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.